Harini, thank you so much for joining us today. Very glad to have you on. Why don't we kick things off by you sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks for having me. My name is Harini Gopalakrishnan, and been working at the intersection of life sciences and the technology for my last 20 plus years of my career. I started off as a bioinformatician, running pipelines to do protein quantification or studying how proteins behave in different kinds of samples. And then I moved to consulting, helping pharma implement services or tech services inside the drug discovery space. And I've subsequently moved to pharma, worked with AI solutions to do real world evidence, then moved to tech like AWS and my last stint with Snowflake, where I helped tech products that are in the or emerging tech products to be leveraged by pharma in different use cases. Have been able to see the perspectives of how the industry operates from different lenses, right? As a consultant, as a purchaser or a buyer of products, vendor products myself in pharma, and also being inside the tech industry selling. So it's just been enriching and learning all the time.
That's awesome. And today we're talking about life sciences. So maybe we can just start very high level. When we're talking about life sciences, what do we mean? What are those things that people should care about when we talk about life sciences?
So for me, when I explain life sciences to people not in the industry, I say it's one of the complex domains because it's probably three sub industries packed into one, because and each of it is completely different in terms of what problems you're solving, what budgetary limitations it might have, and the kind of technologies you might be using as well. So we start off with R&D or research and development, which is primarily the starting point of finding disease to go after, finding a modality to help manage the disease or prevent the disease or cure the disease. And when I say modality, it can be something from a small molecule. That's been traditionally how pharmaceuticals found a cure or found a way to manage your diseases, which is like the pills you take when you have a headache. And then now, more recently, things have moved into what we call large molecules or biologics, where it's more like your insulin injections or antibodies that pharmas make, which are more difficult to create, but it's less side effects on a human body. So that's been becoming more popular now. And very recently, pharmas have even gotten very specific with what people call CAR T cells, especially with cancer, where you take something from your own body to find relevant antidote or a T cell antibody that can go fight against the cancerous cells. So that's extremely personalized, but that's also the way the pharma has evolved. Finding whichever modality you go after for that disease is part of the research drug discovery or the research and development process. The second phase of it is the development, which is then testing that modality in a human body or a human setting. And that itself has many phases. You start with a small population, then you go to a larger and larger population before you get approval to launch it. And once you have approval, you have to manufacture it. Again, the manufacturer is extremely regulated, because whatever is commercial scale, it is going inside some human's body. So there are a lot of protocols and regulations on making sure that the manufacturing is not just efficient, but it's for scalable, but it's like more importantly, follows the methodology that has been set or the guidelines that have been set. So rigorous regulatory processes that are guide this manufacturing effort. Right? And finally, commercial, which is helping bring the drug to patients who need the drug. That is a lot of, and different countries have different ways of commercialization. So a lot of it is focused on educating the doctors or the HCPs and making sure they're aware of the risk and benefits of the drug, aware of when to prescribe somebody onto it, and then reaching out to patients to make sure they are getting the benefit of the drug that they claim, being able to manage any side effects if people report it, more complex things come with following it up for years. Sometimes you have a medication for years, so you need to make sure that there is no complication as it goes on. So a huge value chain, but broadly, it's R&D has its own demands, manufacturing is its own thing, and commercial is its own thing. And all of them have different, as I said, technology needs and drivers.
Yeah, so I love how you kind of broke that down. As somebody who doesn't work in the industry, I'm definitely more familiar with the commercial side. But as you said, there's a lot that happens on the research side, the manufacturing. As we think about this industry, and one of the things that I'm curious about is really how AI can play a role in each of these areas, from the traditional machine learning for drug discovery to Gen AI. How can that be used? So what are you seeing in the industry? How is AI being used? And Maybe you can talk us through what that timeline looks like and how the industry has adopted AI.
So there are three phases to how AI has been used in life sciences, if I were to simplify it, right? The first one, let's call it traditional ML or pre-Gen AI, before AI became mainstream in the last couple of years. The research part of the R&D has always leveraged them, incorporated them in finding new compounds or new drug modalities. And for doing that, they used traditional ML models for doing what we call quantitative structure activity relationship. The bioinformatics work that I was doing a long time ago incorporated machine learning as well for finding which proteins might be acting or not acting in a certain scenario, to a very simplistic way of putting it. And most of these ML models that were used incorporated linear regression or a random forest or a support vector machine. So very traditional ML that were looking at whether this particular molecule, you can predict a property for that molecule based on its structure. And the property can be whether it's toxic or not toxic. Or it can also predict whether a compound is going to be active inside a human body or it need not be active. Or you can use like a decision tree or random forest to find if there is any features of interest or find some nonlinear relationships between different compounds, right, that are not able to be predicted otherwise or figured out otherwise. So these kind of machine learning models are mainstream of those drug discovery paradigm. In fact, they were called virtual screening or virtual selection of compounds to go from millions to a possible 1,000. And then what happened was generative AI became mainstream. So what happened in the last couple of years is that AI was used in a lot more value chain of pharma, like in manufacturing, in commercial, by a lot more practitioners. For example, content writing, content summarization, FAQs of most popular asked questions, helping with training and enablement. So AI just have reached another level of audience that weren't doing these niche work upstream in discovery. And that has just typically use large language models. There are some very niche models as well for drug discovery, including the one that got the Nobel Prize last year for chemistry, which is finding a protein structure using something called AlphaFold. So while generative AI has also transformed the industry, but the general use of generative AI, which most of us use it for, is finding information. Content writing has also just become mainstream across the value chain. For example, people write ad campaigns. People write the brand materials that are going after commercial value chain, and pharma is now using some form of AI to write them out. The third one, which I think is probably the most interesting and where Vespa can play a fit, is in the search and retrieval functions. Every pharma is using generative AI to build a simple RAG chatbot where they want to talk to your data or use your data to generate these summarizations and these articles or being able to find information. What I think is the next wave is to make that as a search problem. Today, the RAG chatbots are simple. You incorporate a dossier or your knowledge base. You convert them into use an embedding model, convert them into a vector data, and then you search to the data. I think refining that search and using retrieval as a foundation is going to be the next big leap, because it's no longer about getting the information. You want to get the right information. So precision and relevance now are the two important terms. They make the AI system or make or break AI system. And they're very critical in a regulated industry like life sciences. So to me, the next big change is in going towards high-powered precision retrieval modality. And for that, every company has started an MVP. Most often use cases are the productivity improvements, finding the help desk ticket, or as I said, helping with content authoring. Where the production-ready AI needs to go is now using that framework of the MVP and make it more precise, make it more relevant to the practitioners asking the questions. That's how the industry is moving.
Okay, so just kind of taking in what you said, as we talk about AI today, a lot of what we are talking about, what's trending, is Gen AI, which over the past few years, everyone's kind of been adopting across all industries. Now, in thinking about life sciences and kind of what makes sense is starting out, it's probably just probably the easiest content to work with, less risky content maybe being used in some of these MVP projects. But as we think about large scale, enterprise wide, wanting to get the most out of that data, really need to go beyond that high level content and need to be able to access all of the information so that you can not just solve for use cases like the help desk, but support every role really in that value chain, whether it's providing the right information to the pharmacy or to doctors or to research scientists. So when we think about the data and how complex it is, can you talk a little bit about the types of data that can be leveraged for Gen AI that goes beyond maybe the typical help desk content?
Sure. So the two aspects of that problem again, first is the multimodal data that the life sciences need to deal with, and that's mainly upstream in the R&D spectrum. So the data is besides text, which most of the world deals with. You have medical images that could be especially in the healthcare side of the hospital system world. A lot of the time we go for screening or preventive screening, or we have a doctor recommends you to go to a biopsy. What happens is that they take a sample and then they do an imaging of that, and then a pathologist would look at it and how things are within the cell to confirm or not if there is any aberration that they should be doing a follow-up on. That happens. That is something that AI is actively tackling to see, can we look at the medical images, and instead of having a manual human who looks at every single image for multiple patients in a day, that takes time. If AI can actually call out these aberrations, and then the human in the loop is actually verifying the ones that are flagged by AI. Of course, I mean, it's a bit more, you need more accuracy in those kind of situations because you're worried about false negatives because you don't want to miss something that's an aberration. But that's one of the reasons why that market is hot, and there's a lot of investments going into AI-based healthcare biotech companies to get that transformation achieved, because it would be a huge effort. The second part of multimodal data, which pharma or AI-based biotechs would come up with, is, let's say, protein embeddings. We talked about the Nobel Prize last year, but proteins themselves are huge complex structures that is in our body that regulates everything in a body. In the past, the way to find the structure of a protein was to do X-ray crystallography, and they were doing it in labs. And now the AI transformer, the generative AI aspect of it is you can give it a sequence and the model can come up with what the structure should be. So now you can actually also have models that embed these complex structure of proteins into another dense vector. So using that modality also in search is a very popular emerging use case. So when we say life science has data of modalities, it doesn't just mean that, okay, we're talking about structured data like numbers and we're talking about text. We're also talking about things that are not normally available in other industries, but looking at an image, looking at a protein embedding, or looking at even a genome embedding in recent times, and working with that to find insights. Within that landscape, having backend that just retrieves across all of these modalities is going to be extremely powerful. And when we say retrieve, it should also do it in a manner that's cost effective, that's performant. It doesn't take half an hour for you to get a result back. And third, you also want accuracy. You want to make sure that you don't get false negatives or false positives. And in some cases, false positives are okay, but false negatives are not. But as I said, optimizing for cost, quality, and performance is the way that customers look to tackle these problems.
It seems like search is such a critical part of that whole retrieval experience and what's needed there. So why would you say, even though it's so critical, why is search kind of an overlooked area in life sciences AI?
I think it's mainly something that the fact that the RAG itself was a relatively new term, that being able to build a retrieval augmented generation solution was something that's new. So people were focusing on, now we have access to all this data, and it's not just accessible for certain set of the population, but you can actually build an application and enable a lot of the users to get information. So that was a new paradigm. So people looked at building a RAG chatbot or a RAG solution that was very siloed, or not siloed, but very vertical or very niche for a specific task. One of the challenges that we have run into even in the earlier prototypes that I built in my previous jobs when we were talking to customers was hallucination, right? And reasoning. So the initial RAG prototypes looked like, okay, if I give it enough data, if I do a lot of data engineering on the data to embed it a certain way, and if I already know what questions the users are likely to ask, it works well, reasonably well. But if as more and as people start to play with it, then the users want to ask more complicated questions. Like, for example, if we built an app for clinical trial queries, right? So we ingested a bunch of clinical trial protocols and let users query that. First few questions, the way you engineered the problem, it could answer a few questions on eligibility criteria. It could answer a few questions on outcome measures. But the more people started playing with it, they wanted to ask more complex questions that required some reasoning, that required some information that was not easily embedded or retrieved. So then what happens is we need search. But that is what people are beginning to understand now, because more and more users are playing with RAG. And so obviously the natural consequence is you want to build a solution that can reason and that can avoid hallucination. And third, we're hearing the word AI agents a lot, which means you also want to build a solution where there are multiple tasks involved, and there is an AI orchestrator that reasons and divides them into tasks, completes those tasks independently, and brings those responses back. And to me, as we approach these three important paradigms, search becomes essential. So it's not overlooked. I think people haven't understood that it's a search problem yet, because everybody's solving for hallucinations. Everybody's solving to build the agentic framework right. And everybody's solving to see how can I reason when there is a complex question that isn't just going into a one large embedding and retrieving everything from that. So that's the reason. But search is extremely important in life sciences, where precision matters deeply, and finding the right, for example, clinical protocol in my use case is extremely important, because that's where, because the end game of this writing this protocol is to file it to regulatory agencies. So finding the right one that can help you get started in completing protocol design is extremely important. It saves time to make sure you get it to the authorities quickly. And you also need to make sure that it retrieves the right information. So if you're building an agentic app and your first step in the retrieval is not bringing the right result, everything downstream is going to amplify that error. So people are going to discover the importance of search and retrieval. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So you were the global CTO of life sciences at Snowflake, and you've been at Vespa for a short time now. I'm curious, just from your experience and what you've uncovered thus far, can you share some examples of what differentiates Vespa and how Vespa can kind of solve some of these problems in life sciences?
two things that are, as I said, the common theme and building the RAG is optimizing for enterprises. It's optimizing cost, quality, and performance. And you cannot say one is more important than the other. It has to be harmonized, because at the end of the day, any enterprise building, the most important thing is that you give your users an ability to find precise information, but it cannot come up an overarching, you can't put an humongous or an exorbitant bill to achieve that. So you have to you have to manage your cost and ROI while building that solution that's precise. At the same time, performance is important. You can't just say that, okay, I'm going to optimize cost, but I'm going to take 2 days for you to get an answer. Companies are in this angle of finding technologies that manage all three. And the two things about Vespa is that strikes it makes it relevant is the first one, which I discovered the term honestly after coming here, is multi-phase ranking. So we talked about building an agentic application, how the retrieval is very important across each step of the agent reasoning, because getting the wrong information the first time is going to amplify the impact all the way down. So the multi-phase search of Vespa, which is probably a complex concept, but the main dummy or 101 version of it is that you do search in multiple phases behind the scenes. The user asks a question, the LLM would interpret the question, and behind the scenes in Vespa, all you do is you embed the document as chunks, but the multi-phase concept of Vespa would break it into 3 phases, where the first one, you retrieve very broadly. Say you're looking for protocols with breast cancer, you just do a semantic or a lexical search for all protocols with breast cancer or synonyms of breast cancer and get it broadly. The second phase, you use a custom function to refine that to a certain set of documents that you might want. Say, for example, it's geography, or say, for example, you have a custom ML algorithm to decide what is relevant. Maybe it's what's relevant for the last 6 months, or you want protocols that have only been already closed. So you can add additional filter to the subset. And the third phase, where you even go deeper, where you refine it and re-rank it to an extent where it's extremely relevant. And here, you can also use machine learning models to do the ranking. Like you can use something like Colbert to enable the ranking. And what it does in this multi-phase step is you do the biggest search in a distributed manner across millions of documents globally. But as you use the heavier models to find and re-rank and refine, you do it on a smaller and smaller subset of data. So then you bring in your cost optimizations overall. And important thing is it's done natively with the platform. So you just provide the formula for re-ranking. You provide the formula for how to do it in terms of what is your user preference or user signal. And the Vespa engine would take care of it. You're not writing additional code to get the results and configuring it in a different way. The second aspect, which I think is interesting, is tensors. Like you can manipulate everything as tensors. Again, for layman, people store things as vectors today. We talked about embedding and embedding as a vector. A tensor is, I think we can safely say, is a vector of vectors. So you can have an array of vectors where one is a dense embedding of, say, a chemical compound. The other is another kind of embedding of the chemical compound, say it's sparse. Then along with that, you have a metadata or text description of these compounds. So now a tensor describes a compound with multiple different ways. And when you do a search, you can search across all of these values of tensors at the same time. In the past, you would have to execute 3 different searches and again reconcile it with logic. So being able to manage tensor is huge when you're dealing with medical modal embeddings that are as we talked about, like images or proteins or compounds. And multi-phase search, I think, is what people need when you're doing accurate retrieval with some cost optimization.
Yeah. And so in thinking about what you were saying about the important things that's needed for life sciences when it comes to retrieval really are being able to optimize the costs and performance and accuracy. So as you're kind of speaking through this multi-phase ranking example, I can see where obviously cost is optimized because you're not doing the expensive models on the broad range of data. You're narrowing it down before you get to those more expensive models. But also through the multi-phase ranking and being able to customize what you're doing at each stage and what you're looking for and how you're doing that, that can really, really increase the accuracy and make sure that the best, most precise content is being returned.
Yeah, I think the layered approach essentially it's avoiding running of heavy computation on irrelevant data that might not be relevant, and it ensures that the final results are then optimized for precision and for the business logic that you desire. So being able to do that custom ranking, custom business logic on ranking and scoring of what do you mean by relevance
Yeah.
to you is the most important aspect. And I think some people call it relevancy tuning, but if you were to have one takeaway from the podcast of what makes Vespa different, I think it's being able to do the relevancy tuning, being able to rank or score what's important to you is the most important fact.
Yeah.
And you do it on the relevant data, not on all of it.
Right, right. And the tensor operations as well, you mentioned. So that's another way to really kind of optimize and improve the accuracy because you're able to look at multiple dimensions at once instead of kind of searching it for all these individual kind of criteria and then combining it later on. So that's more about the accuracy as well, right?
Exactly. And it's also about performance because you can technically say, I'm going to do a distance search, like an L2 distance or cosine on a dense embedding separately. But what you can do with accuracy is accuracy. But you can then, if you want to then also use that to filter based on metadata that's in the image or metadata that's in the protein, then you will do a follow-up separately on that as a filter option. With the tensor representation, first of all, accuracy on a single execution is great, but it's also performance because in a single query, I'm also solving for, hey, I want these properties, like say distance to be an aspect of finding relevant protein molecules. But at the same time, I also want to see the text that contains these values. Or I have another embedding representation. I want to use both embedding representation to find the best protein and give a weightage to one or the other, probably a higher weightage. So while you tune the accuracy, as we discussed, it also is being able to execute that in a single query, which means I'm getting those results faster.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about a couple of the technical details behind Vespa and how it can be used for RAG and life sciences. So can you share some practical examples of how life sciences companies can use Vespa today?
So there are three areas where Vespa can help accelerate life sciences in their journey to build generative AI solutions or RAGs. So the first one, and we start with drug discovery again, and there the use of tensors is definitely going to help as companies are looking to find, for example, using medical images and finding images are part of what these researchers do, especially in fields like oncology, because a lot of the information that comes from the data sets is similar to how much a disease progresses over a certain period of time. And you measure disease progression by looking at the images of, for example, is the tumor metastasized or is there a abnormal cell inside the body, etc. And there is also an element in the past in research of called high content screening, where they're screening content, which is the things that are inside the cell. And having a tensor representation of those images is going to help in finding those similar candidates or finding candidates with a certain level of progression much faster than having to use machine learning real time. So tensor manipulation in drug discovery for those modalities like as we said, compounds, images, proteins, genes, if they come with each comes with a embedding model and people are developing more and more of these models, I think are going to be huge in accelerating that. Then for the rest of the value chain, like regulated ones like clinical or in manufacturing, being able to they sit on a lot of data. You have to realize most of these enterprise pharma sits on years of institutionalized knowledge. They have to connect across the internal data for vaults where the past protocols or past regulatory communications or interactions with the regulatory agencies that form their medical group exist. So tapping into that, because and every time they launch a new study or a new protocol, they have to actually rewrite some of this, and they can leverage from the content that's already available inside their institutional databases and external databases like the clinicaltrials.gov or the literature that gets published every year by other peers of theirs in other companies, using that information to craft another content authoring, regulatory content authoring is going to be immensely useful. So for that, having an accurate retrieval, being able to do search, more relevant search is going to be extremely important. So that's another area where Vespa will come and can definitely help as companies use. The third is in commercial. Again, in commercial, a lot of this use cases around how do you create brand and marketing content? How do you give relevant information to your field sales to talk when they go meet with a HCP? The information for that comes from inside websites that companies have built that talk about a certain drug performance, inside PowerPoints and what they call promotional promo meds that have been created by agencies for them to go and talk to these HCPs, being able to present in conferences. Tapping into that to be able to create a concise summary is extremely important, because that saves time for the field sales to go and have a conversation with HCP. That saves time for when you want to launch this particular modality in a new country, you can find relevant information to be able to create content that can then be taken to websites, that can be taken to conferences, etc. So having relevancy there is again important. In most cases, people build these chatbots that can find information, but then what they have to go back and is retrieve more of those data points to see what is relevant. Because there, as I said, there's tons of information from PowerPoints to campaigns to Salesforce interactions that are in text in some transactional system. Getting all of that and creating one dossier that's relevant is very key as well. So to me, the value chain of pharma is across. It's either in commercial, it's in clinical for protocol optimization, or in commercial for creating brand content, or in drug discovery to accelerate your screening pipelines. It's extremely important. And then there is another industry that we haven't talked into, which is the health tech. Those are the systems that consolidate a lot of the multimodal data from diagnostics labs, from hospitals, and then build a cohort of patients that are interesting for a pharma to research into. For those companies, their bread and butter is consolidating data and finding the relevant data. So for them, they have to rethink their way of doing it. Instead of writing complex SQL or doing filter, you can rethink it as a search problem where you ask the questions to your database, and something like vespa-ai can translate that and do a hybrid search across structured, unstructured, and semi-structured data, and bring in the right response. Is going to change the way they build these applications, which requires a lot of data engineering, and you can reduce the data engineering time. So a lot of possibilities both in pharma and CROs, and also the health tech companies that sell to these pharma.
Yeah. I mean, even for myself and thinking about RAG and GenAI and all of the things that are happening, where it started with we can take content and make it easy to find and generate answers for, but now we're really opening it up to beyond just text. Really, possibilities are endless in how we can really make the most of all of this data, all this multimodal data that these life sciences organizations have. As we wrap, Harini, what are some key takeaways that you would say, and after this, we covered a lot in this short amount of time. So what would you say are the key takeaways that you'd like to leave behind?
I think for me, the key takeaway is rethink your RAG applications, think more broadly. You got to move from pilots to production grade applications, and you have to balance, as I said, your cost while doing so. So rethink RAG, rethink your questions, and more importantly, generative AI has been widely used in content creation, right? But what we are now talking about is curating the content for the right audience. And in a complex regulated domain, we said that is extremely critical. So as you consider search platforms, I would say the key takeaway is think about what you need in that search engine, what data would go in there, and how you can do that custom ranking and scoring. And I think it'll be great to have a conversation as you think about these use cases and see how Vespa-ai can fit into those settings. And lastly, some of the customers I've talked to look at embedding. We talked about a lot of high dimensional data and manipulating that. People still think of it in a traditional way. They use high dimensional data as a data, and they use it for machine learning access. So rethink of it as a search problem as well. There are custom embedding models coming out, so you can represent this data in many different ways. And when you rethink it as a search problem, there are some accuracies and some performances you can unlock. So that would be another thing, is redefine how you look at the data itself.
I love that. No, that's great. Well, this has been a fascinating topic. I've learned so much from you, and everything from the research to manufacturing to the commercial side of life sciences, how we're applying AI. Thank you so much for joining us, Harini. And we look forward to reading more of your blogs that you release.
Sure. Thanks a lot for having me, Bonnie. And yeah, let's hopefully bring Vespa to life sciences.